When Kit Guru visited Silverstone at Computex 2025, we saw a great many new products, including a very retro FLP02, a tower PC case that looked like it could have been 20 or even 30 years old. We thought it was a great deal of fun, but the comments under the video suggested this is a case that a great many of you want us to take a look at. And today I do not have the FLP02, but instead have the FLP01. A home theatre PC case that shares the same retro look and feel as the FLP02, which we are promised is coming soonish. So until we get to the FLP02, let's take a look at this FLP01. Visually, the FLP01 sits on your desktop horizontally rather than as a tower, and the reason for that, for those of you who don't remember these things, is that we used to have VGA monitors about this size, 13, 14, 15 inches on the diagonal, which would sit on top of your PC. The other visual trick are the dummy floppy bays in the front. However, one of these floppy bays is actually an external optical drive bay, and as you can see, I've put a DVD writer in there. Haven't used that drive in, frankly, years. So it's an interesting looking case. Let's take a quick look inside. 2 screws on the top panel, which pulls and comes away. It's just plain stamped steel. As I say, I've installed this drive. It's not part of the case. 4 screws for that bracket. This is a multi-function bracket, so you can install an optical drive, as I have done. You can install a 3.5-inch hard drive underneath, and if I remove the optical drive, you will see you can install another hard drive in this bay here, which obviously would be internal. If you choose, of course, you could install another 5.25-inch accessory, something like a fan controller, which would sit in this position. If you're going to do that, you'd remove the stealth door. And the front panel I/O lies beneath that second 5.25-inch floppy bay. Let's take out this cross brace. Secured with 2 screws. And there we have it. The FLP01 is ready for build time. We have a single 120mm fan installed on this side of the case. There's a mount for a second fan next to that, and around the back we can install a pair of 80mm fans above the rear I/O. The slightly surprising thing is that you can install a motherboard larger than E80X. We have a full array of expansion slots, and you can install a reasonable length graphics card. The one obvious limitation is the height available for your CPU cooler. The manual makes no reference to liquid cooling. If you wanted to install a 240 cooler, it would have to go on this side here, and then it would hang over the motherboard. So I'm quite sure you'd be restricted to an air cooler. And let's see how that looks in practice. I've installed this MSI Mag B850 Tomahawk Max Wi-Fi motherboard in the Silverstone case, along with the Ryzen 5 9600X processor and some G.Skill DDR5 memory. Why a Ryzen 5, you might wonder? Yep, it's a low power processor, and I think that's going to be the route we have to go down with this particular build. You will see the 120mm fan supply with the case installed, and we can easily install a second 120mm fan if we choose to get extra air intake. I've actually installed that fan and exhaust. Let's just get that right, shall we? There we go. 2 120s in intake, and you can also see there's no scope for installing a 240 AIO because of the heat sinks on the motherboard VRMs and indeed the motherboard itself. So air intake only. And what about a CPU cooler? Let's take this Cooler Master Hyper 212. So it's a classic form factor single tower 120mm fan. Drop it on top of the processor, and you can see the cooler stands proud of the chassis. Even though there's heaps of space around the cooler, the chassis stands too low. I could, however, take a specialist cooler such as this Noctua NHL12. It also uses a 120mm fan, but it's downdraft. And there we go, goes in nice and easy. Heaps of space. So if you want to spend a tidy sum on a specialist air cooler, no problem. Personally, I think it's more likely you're going to use the stock cooler that comes with processors, or that used to come with processors. This is at least a generation old. And it goes in nice and easily. It's also worth pointing out with this AMD cooler, I have to remove these two brackets, 4 screws out with the 2 plastic hold down clips, and then I put the cooler in place. But that in turn means I need to hold the back plate as I install the cooler. And I've got no access to the back of the motherboard. So to install this cooler on this motherboard, I'm going to have to remove the motherboard from the case, install the cooler, and then put the assembly back. So I could use this. I can't use this. Think I'm going to have to use this. I've installed the AMD Stealth cooler on the motherboard, and the cabling is tidied up, and I've spotted a little problem. You'll note I've put the cross brace back in place. I offer up the optical drive bay, and it's just fouling against the shroud on the cooler. The overlap is in the order of 1 or 2 millimeters. So if I want to install the optical drive, which seems like a good retro feature to use, then if I bend in one of these tabs here, or now I'm going to take a piece off that AMD cooler. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, but that is a problem, as they say, for future Leo. Next, it's time for the power supply. I have this SilverStone Extreme 1200R, which despite the mighty rating, 1200 watts and platinum, is actually SFX-L in form factor, and it's supplied with an ATX adapter. Doesn't feel right standing this case up when its whole point is that it lays down. If I put this inside, and now I just have to connect up a bunch of cables, and we have a power supply, a motherboard assembly, and then of course we're going to have to put a graphics card inside our PC.
With 20 years of PC manufacturing experience, CyberPower PC are the best in the business. With the largest range of parts available in the UK, our team of experienced builders will expertly build and test each system to be delivered to you the very next day. Check out cyberpowersystem.co.uk.
Yeah, that's not going to work. My clever idea of using this power supply purely because it's a SilverStone and it's the SilverStone power supply I have does not work because the cables are too short. And that's a standard thing with the SFX power supplies. After all, they go in small cases. And in this case, as it were, the power supply is way down this end and the connection points are way up this end. And there's a graphics card in the middle. So I'm going to remove the SilverStone power supply from the SilverStone case, and I'm going to switch over to my tried and true Seasonic Focus GX1000. Okay, that's going to work. And then when it comes to a graphics card, I am somewhat restricted. So for example, this MSI Ventus 3X RTX 4090 is not an option by about 1.5 centimeters. But even if I could squeeze it in, things would start to get rather tight in terms of cable routing around the side. So I'm going to go for this Intel Arc B580, which fits in nice and snug. As you can see, I'm making progress, and after a subtle modification to my AMD CPU cooler, I can now install the SilverStone drive bay, and that means I can add a large 3.5-inch hard drive to the SilverStone, and also install an optical drive. And that's the last of the hardware installed. As you can see, it's slightly tight for space around the CPU cooler, and the DVD drive overshadows the cooler slightly. Plus, of course, you've got the cables to worry about. And we can install the top cover, turn on our PC, and do a quick bit of thermal testing before I give my conclusions. Externally, there's very little to let you know the SilverStone FLP01 is running. You can forget about Windows and RGB with this PC case. We can, however, eject our optical drive, and to remind you what that sounds like, it goes like this. To test the SilverStone FLP01, we're using a combination of Speedway Stress Test and Cinebench R23. Our components are relatively low power, so the Ryzen 5 9600X draws 88 watts and runs at 4.95 GHz, while the Intel Arc B580 graphics draw 125 watts and run at 2.85 GHz. And the system sounds like this. We're not going to dwell on thermals because the PC behaves perfectly well and these aren't performance components, with an ambient of 22 degrees C, and remember we're using a stock AMD cooler, the processor's running at 95 Celsius and the Intel graphics at 78 degrees.
If you're looking for a new chair, then definitely go and check out boolies.co.uk. They offer a whole host of gaming and office chairs that come in a variety of different finishes and different colours.
And we reach my conclusions about the SilverStone FLP01, which is coming into stock in the very next few days, and I understand the UK price is going to be £129.99 including VAT. I don't have a clue about the US pricing at the moment, but let's face it, who does have a clue about US pricing? £130 is quite a lot for what looks like a very old and bizarre PC case. But I will tell you this, it has the standard SilverStone high quality build, the components go together well, and it looks and feels solid when you're building in it. Pros and cons, let's start with the pros, the good points. It has humorous retro styling. It has support for a 5¼ inch optical drive and a full-size 3.5 inch hard drive, or two 3.5s if you ditch the optical drive, or you can stick in 2.5 inch SSDs. And there's plenty of space for a full-size motherboard, beyond ATX, and also a full-size ATX power supply. Cons, the negative points. You have very limited options for CPU cooling. In fact, let me show you something. Once I've figured out you basically have to use a stock cooler with your processor, and these days manufacturers don't tend to supply stock coolers, I actually went out, well, didn't go out, I went to Amazon and bought some brand new stock AMD coolers. That's a Wraith Stealth. I messed up here and got a second Wraith Stealth, but I think it's a very slightly different vertical height to the first one. I hoped one of those two would have a copper core, as does the cooler in here. I also have the Wraith Prism, which has RGB, and as I recall this is made by Cooler Master. It's quite a decent CPU cooler, as I recall, but it's been a very long time since I've used any of these coolers. So I think I'm going to spend a few hours over the next week or two just using stock AMD coolers to decide, are they actually any good or not? Anyway, so I spent money on 3 AMD coolers. Who knew that's going to happen? Where were we? Cons. Limited options for CPU cooling. In other words, I've had to use a stock AMD cooler. Also, SilverStone calls this an HTPC case. In other words, home theatre PC, which in turn means you're meant to have it in your front room under your television so it handles media duties such as Blu-ray. I cannot imagine a living room where this would look appropriate under a TV. How can I put this? I can't imagine a married man who's going to be allowed by his wife to have this under their TV. Please comment below if you disagree, but that's my experience in life. And finally, the price is a bit steep at £130, and it only includes a single 120mm fan. Overall, I'm going to say this is a 7.5 out of 10. It's a worth considering. I mean, personally, I would not buy this case because, as I say, there's no way it's going under my TV. Therefore, it doesn't meet its name. It's an HTPC. I have a great deal of confidence the FLP02, when it arrives, when we saw Computex, is going to be a better all-round PC case, even though that's like £200. That I'm really looking forward to. FLP01, it's fun, it's interesting, it's not for me.